I'd like to start off by sharing with you a fact you may not be aware of. All of you, everyone sitting here, has been the victim of a crime. What crime is that, you might ask? It's easy. Theft. Theft of maybe your most precious resource, your time. Think for a moment, if you will, about the thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours that you spent in classrooms, lecture halls, maybe right here, listening to people talk to you. Most of them have been, let's say, mediocre, right? You were kind of bored the whole time. You were checking your email left and right. You left not retaining any new information. You didn't learn anything. Some of them have been okay. Maybe you learned one or two things, and then in a week forgot it. And a couple of them have been truly exceptional, and they impacted your professional or personal lives forever. So my goal here today is to make everyone here, in some way, better at delivering effective presentations, with a specific goal so that every time you give a presentation, you will change the behavior of your audience, and they're going to leave your talk and do something different that they didn't do before. We're going to go over the nuts and bolts of how to construct a presentation, from selecting a topic, figuring out who your audience is, how to put together PowerPoint slides. We're going to talk about probably the most, neglected aspect of delivering a presentation is the actual delivery. And then we're going to go over some of the excruciatingly common, agonizingly common mistakes that people make when they deliver presentations all the time. So I should probably start off by mentioning that I really don't think that I'm kind of worthy to be here in front of such a distinguished group. I'm not actually sure how I ended up here. I think it went something like this. Dr. Spevetz said at a GME meeting, hey, we need a faculty member to deliver a talk on how to give an effective presentation. And my friend and colleague, Drew Nice, did what he usually does when people are assigning work, and he heroically stood up and said, I'll make Rich Byrne do it. And here I am. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the people that have come before me that have impacted my own kind of speaking career. For those who don't know, this is Sergio Zanotti, who was a critical care attending here at Cooper, probably the best speaker that I've ever seen at Cooper. He gave a lecture to me and my class as residents called Death by PowerPoint, which had a profound impact on how I thought about giving presentations. This is Amal Mattu. He's kind of a personal hero of mine, probably the most prolific and famous speaker in emergency medicine. He also gave a talk on how to give a presentation, from which I've shamelessly plagiarized for my own presentation. But I'm really humbled to be here because I really think that being good at delivering presentations requires experience. Years and years of honing your craft, refining it, and putting in the time. Which is I'm really humbled to be here today with my co-presenter, Dr. William Coker, who is about as famous as you can get in the world of education. He's such kind of a big deal that there's actually, forgive me, you correct me if I'm wrong, a painted portrait of you hanging in the halls of the Jefferson Medical School. So that's him. And then there's me. Most of you don't even know my name, and they just said it like 2 minutes ago. And you're not even sure where I work. It's the emergency department. It's this place between the kitchen and the CDU. Sometimes patients come from there. It's not really important. But anyway, I'm really excited and happy to talk to you today. That's my point. So I'd like to start off by asking what the purpose of a presentation is. Many people seem to think that a presentation is basically a way to efficiently transmit knowledge from one person to a ton of people. And that's true, but I would say the art of the oral presentation is much more than that, because there's more efficient ways to transmit knowledge. Textbooks, podcasts, review papers, journal articles. Those are all even more efficient ways to mass transmit information to other people. So what makes an oral presentation different is that it is really an argument. Imagine that you're a lawyer talking to a jury, and what you're trying to do is persuade your audience through your sheer physical presence to change their behavior, to leave your talk and go out and do something different that they didn't before. That is the framework that I want you to think about when you're putting together an oral presentation. You're not just transmitting information. You want people to do something different that they weren't doing before. So let's talk about the nuts and bolts of constructing it. Remember, this talk is called How to Give a Terrible Presentation, because I think that is instructive in how to give a good presentation. So first of all, you want to give a terrible presentation? Don't spend too much time on it, okay? Like, you've got a lot of things to do, all right? Don't spend more than maybe an hour or so. If I gave everyone in this room an assignment to go home and come up with a lecture and come back in here and do it tomorrow as PowerPoint, you could all pretty much do it. I guarantee you could all do it. They would be terrible, but you could do it. It's easy to spot these kind of thrown together talks. Whenever I give residents assigned lectures to prepare, I'm constantly emailing them like weeks ahead of time saying, hey, what's your topic? How you doing collecting your research? Your slides coming together okay? You've been practicing? You want to go over it with me? You want to practice? And there's dead silence on their end. I hear nothing from them for weeks on end. And then like 2 days before, I see them in the department and say, hey, how's your talk coming along? And they say, I haven't really picked a topic yet. I got some time tomorrow, the night before. I'll figure it out. And I shudder because I know exactly how that presentation is going to go. It takes time to really sit down, research, craft, edit, and practice to be an effective presenter. I was here last night in this room, 6 o'clock at night, talking to a bunch of empty chairs, practicing this. The environmental services people thought I had escaped from the psych ward. I had a showdown with security. It was the whole thing. But that is, since it takes so much time to practice and do it correctly, I knew that I needed to make sure that I gave you an effective presentation. And so practicing the talk probably takes a good 50% of the time that I put into making a lecture, right? As a rule of thumb, a 1-hour presentation will take about 10 hours of your time to put together. This talk, I've done it before, probably altogether it's taken me 30 hours. And that probably includes, just for the talk tonight, about 5 or 6 hours practicing the talk. So why do I do that? Because I respect you. I respect my audience enough to take the time to do it right. There's something like 70 physicians in this room. If I wasted all of your hour, that's 70 hours of physician's time that's been wasted. If you're a surgeon, that's a lot of money. You want to give a terrible presentation? Don't worry about who you're talking to, right? Because you're the one who's important. You're the one giving the talk. Your audience, whatever, they can deal. They'll adapt to you. This is, in fact, a terrible strategy. One of the first things you need to do, even before you sit down to prepare your lecture, is to realize who you're talking to, who your audience is. It's a vastly different talk talking to medical students versus even interns versus second-year residents versus faculty members versus nurses. And if you can't connect to them, speak in their language, talk about things that are important to them, you've lost your audience, and you're going to waste their time. Making the audience care about what you have to say is your #1 priority. So, for example, when I was a resident, we had a problem in the emergency department. The mid-shift residents would come in, and around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, the ED is jammed. No patients are coming back. They're piling up in the waiting room. We can't see any patients. Lots of physicians can't see anyone. So I tried to get a protocol through nursing where we took the patients, brought them to a triage room, did an H&P, sent off some initial blood tests. By the time they came back, they were ready for disposition. And when I sat down to talk in front of a bunch of nurses, I knew one thing. I could not expect the triage nurse to do one more iota of work. If you've ever seen triage in the emergency department, it's like the most chaotic 8x4 space in the entire hospital. If I tried to make them do any more work, it would be a disaster. So I emphasized, look, this is the residents doing everything, and we're going to make your lives easier. You're going to have less work to do, and that is why it went over so well. Let's say you're a chairperson going to give a presentation to the second floor about why your physicians in your department should be paid more money. So a poor strategy would be go in there and say something like, my physicians work really hard. And they're going to say, well, of course they should work hard. They have to work hard. Why? Of course they need to work hard. You'd be much better off speaking their language, talking about things that they care about and understand, saying things like press Gainey and AIDIT and throughput and RVUs and core measures, spreadsheet, things that they like. So now that you know who your audience is, how are you going to make them care about what you have to say? This is one effective strategy. You may recognize this as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with things like your own personal safety, food, water, housing at the very base, and then things at the top like feeling good about yourself. Not super important, and that's why this is way at the base, anchoring the pyramid. And so if you can get your audience to think that like their own personal safety, welfare, or the safety of their patients, or their housing situation is at risk, that is a great way to make people pay attention. Like, for example, if you were giving a lecture on personal protective equipment, right? That's like the most horrendous topic you could possibly think of. It's awful, right? So if I were going to give a talk on that, I would say something like, in the next 30 years, the odds are very good that a super virus is going to emerge, which will have a 90% mortality rate, and there's no treatment. And if you don't listen to what I'm going to say in the next 60 minutes, you'll probably die. Maybe your whole family will die. And then the audience is like, well, I don't want to die. I better actually pay attention to what this guy has to say. So getting down to what the learners want to hear about and getting them to engage, I would encourage you to try to figure out what the wants, the needs, and the fears of your learners are. So for example, doing EKG interpretation for a bunch of interns. If I get up in the front of the room and say things like, we're going to talk about Brugada syndrome, that is way over their heads, okay? They don't want to learn about that. What do they want to learn about? Very basics. They don't even know a P wave from a T wave, let alone what Brugada syndrome is. if I was giving a lecture on airway management to my senior residents, and I think to myself, what are they afraid of? Well, all EM physicians are really afraid, I don't know if you know this, about the day comes when a patient comes into the emergency department, like that, requires intubation, and if you can do it, they'll be okay, and if you can't do it, they're going to die. And so I say that to the residents. I say, this talk is important. Here's why. In your future, there's going to be a patient like this who's coming in, and if you can't intubate them, they're going to die. That's what they're afraid of, and I've tapped into that, and now I've got their attention. Physicians getting to talk about electronic medical records. What do they want? They want to spend less time doing EMR. They want to spend less time charting sitting in front of a computer and more time with their patients. So if I'm getting a bland talk on the electronic medical records in ICD-10, I would try to lead by saying something like, if you pay attention to what I'm going to tell you over the next hour, you'll shave off a half an hour every day sitting in front of a computer. Has anyone ever had this happen to you? We're here to save you, but unfortunately not on the computer. This happens in the emergency department all the time. A patient comes in, they have no pulse, they're in VFib, and I'll say something like, get this medicine from the Omnicell, and nurses will say, we can't, he's not registered. And I'll say, sir, what's your social security number? Also, have you traveled outside of the country in the last month? We really need to get you registered. That's what EMR gets you. So you want to give a terrible presentation? Don't worry about the topic. Right? Whatever. You can give a talk on anything if you're a good speaker, right? Who cares if you find it personally boring? This is a terrible idea because your learners will very quickly pick up on the fact that you're bored by your own topic. And if you're bored, why should they care? Why are they going to pay attention to something that you clearly don't care about? So an even better strategy than being assigned a topic to do is to, first of all, find out what you're interested in, come up with the topics ahead of time, and then when someone comes to you and says, I need a didactic, you can say, sure, I've got these 5 things. These are 5 things that I'm passionate about, that I can speak with authority, and that I really enjoy. You are way ahead of the game. Now, if you have to do something that you don't want to do, they assign you something and you can't say no because it's your boss, for example, then at the very least, pick a subtopic or some sliver of that broader topic that you find interesting. So if they're talking about, if you need to give a talk about COPD, that's pretty boring. But if you talk about, hey, strategies to do an intubation on a COPD patient, that's kind of exciting for me, and so I'm going to talk about that. Make it my own, something that I'm interested in. Because if you're not excited, why should your audience care? You want to give a terrible presentation? Name it something really boring and mundane, like that, or like that, or like that. This is really helpful for your learners because as soon as they see that title on the sheet, they're prepared to come in and not pay any attention to you. That's really nice of you to give them a heads up that this is going to be a really boring topic and they should just kind of doze off. You're mentally preparing them to be bored and they're not in any position to learn. The title should at least be something kind of visceral that captures their attention. Pearls and pitfalls is a favorite. Pearls and pitfalls, because no one wants to fall into a pit when they're trying to diagnose pulmonary embolism. Everyone loves pearls. They're going to be engaged and ready to learn when they come to your talk. Deadly misdiagnosis and EKG interpretation. Again, tapping into the fear of doing harm to a patient by not being able to diagnose something on an EKG. Carbon monoxide, the silent killer. Now, these are like kind of dramatic titles, and for sure, if your talk is terrible and you're a terrible speaker, this is not going to save you by any means, okay? Right? They're still, but you'll get at least their first 5 minutes of attention, and sometimes that's all you need. Grab them for the first 5 minutes with a reasonable title that's going to excite them about what you're going to talk about. Don't start off behind the 8 ball with a horrific title. This is one that I personally use. This talk will save lives. Tips and tricks for advanced airway management. That's what my airway management talk is called. You want to give a terrible presentation? Just harp on like basic facts over and over again. Things that your audience already knows, because people love to hear about things that they already know and believe, right? So if you're giving a talk on appendicitis, go on and on and on and on about basic pathophysiology of appendicitis and stick to the basics. Because after all, if they can read it in 5 minutes, why are they listening to you for 60 minutes? So remember, when you're talking to an audience, what do they know? What's their baseline knowledge level? Okay? Quickly address the basics of the topic that you're pretty sure they already know about, and then move on to something they don't know about. Because if you spend even 10 minutes going over basics that they already know about, they're gone. Their attention span is not, they can't stick through those 10 minutes and then move on to what you really want to talk about. So hit the basics and move on. You want to give a terrible lecture? Do a really deep dive into this stuff. Pathophysiology, epidemiology, genetics. Talk at great length about long-dead, obscure philosophers and researchers and physicians that no one's ever heard of. People love this kind of stuff. It's really useful information. So, for example, here's some things that I've seen in lectures before. The incidence of subarachnoid hemorrhage is 9.1 per 100,000 annually. This is information that is not important to anyone. I worry about subarachnoid hemorrhage every day of my life, and this is totally useless information to me. Is that a lot? I don't even know. Is that big? I think I actually made that number up, but I don't know. Is that big or not? It's not helping you. It's not helping your audience. Compare that to this, which is kind of helpful. The average ED physician will see about 1 subarachnoid hemorrhage a year, or 1 subarachnoid hemorrhage for every 50 migraines. That's something that actually is helpful in placing the disease into a context. I don't know why, but it seems to be mandatory while giving a presentation that you talk about how much money it costs the healthcare system because you think your audience cares about that. When I hear people say things like, this disease process costs the healthcare system $750 million annually, I sit in the back of the room and think, I don't know what that means. Is that a lot? Maybe that's not enough. Maybe we should be spending more money on it. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a lot of money. Do you want your audience to remember that? You want them to remember that and then not the actual meat of your talk? So information that is not helpful, you shouldn't include. You can say things like, it's a serious problem, it costs a lot of money, and that's pretty much it. Move on. This is my favorite of all. It's many slides referencing long dead people that no one's ever heard of. For example, where does the name lupus come from? Okay, maybe some people find that kind of interesting, but do you really want that to be one of the things your learners take away? I mean, you've got a chance to maybe get 3 or 4 points maximum out of the lecture. Do you want them to remember where the name lupus comes from so that a week later they're sitting in the doctor's office and they're speaking with a patient and they say something like, yeah, you have lupus, ma'am. Hey, did you know that Rogerius named it lupus because he thought the rash on your face looked like wolf bites? Isn't that interesting? And lupus was the Roman word for wolf. It's the Latin word for wolf. Isn't that interesting? And then the patient will say, okay, so what's the treatment? And your learner goes, oh, I don't know that. But isn't that wolf thing interesting? Okay, here's a slide that I actually took off the internet. I think I Googled something like terrible PowerPoint slide, and this is what came up. If you were a researcher into the genetics of hepatitis C and this slide came up, even you would fall asleep. This is a terrible, terrible slide full of useless information that is important to no one, even people who specialize in this, right? Just useless kind of filler information that you're throwing in there because you need 50 slides. You want to give a terrible presentation? Try to cram everything about the topic into one talk. That's a good strategy, right? Because you don't want to miss anything. You want to get everything in there so you don't miss anything. Cram it all in. It's like throwing a plate of spaghetti up against the wall. See what sticks. Maybe some of it will stick. And this is crucial. I can't emphasize this enough. Put at least 10 bullet points with information per slide. 10 bullet points, 50 or 60 slides. That's like 500 pieces of information. You've really hit everything. This is a terrible idea. Don't do it. Again, this is a talk called How to Give a Terrible Lecture, not How to Give a Good Lecture. Because here's the facts about retention of all the information that you're throwing at your learners, okay? 40% is gone in 20 minutes. 60% is gone in 12 hours. 90% of the information that you present is gone in a week. So don't throw as much information as possible at your audience. You need to pick and choose what you really want them to get out of it, okay? There's a concept out there called the four concept rule, okay? It basically says this. If you try to teach someone one thing, they can learn it. They'll remember it. 2 things, no problem. 3 things, you're pushing it, but they can remember 3 things. 4 things, they're tapped out. That's pretty much as they can remember. If you try to go 5 or 6 concepts, not only can they not remember the 5 or 6 concepts, they can't remember any concepts. They actually don't remember anything. It's like you went off a cliff of your brain, and now instead of learning anything, they've learned nothing. So 3 or 4 major concepts is really what you want to emphasize. Don't throw every piece of information about like a disease process at them. That's a waste of your time. You want to give a terrible presentation? Textbooks are great. Like, that's the authority, that's the source, right? So why am I bothering to put together this lecture when I could just kind of copy and paste from a textbook, throw it into my lecture, kind of read it to you? That's a textbook. It's way better than anything that I'm going to be able to come up with, right? This is a terrible idea for multiple reasons. 1, people could just read the textbook that you're presenting to them and do it way more quickly and efficiently. And 2, things that are written down are not meant to be given as a verbal presentation, okay? There's kind of an art and a prosody to the way that you speak and in more conversational tones, and the written text is not designed to be read out loud. It's awful, it's boring, and no one's going to pay any attention to you. Found a ready-made lecture online? Awesome. I just cut my work in half. I'm just going to cut and paste this, throw it on there, and then read it. If I tried to read this, I guarantee you that you wouldn't pay attention to a word that I said, and you would just start reading the slide. It's like a reflex that people in the audience have to start reading the slide if there's words up there. You can't pay attention to the speaker. Some of you are reading this right now. This guy's looking, he's not looking at me. He's looking at that. You're reading it, aren't you? So don't shove as many words into a slide as you can. Even if it's good information, it's a terrible way to give an oral presentation because, again, no one's going to pay any attention to the words that you're saying. If you do, make sure that all the words come up at the same time, okay? The way I'm doing it, not right. You want them to come up all at once, like this, right? And then instead of reading one at a time, I'll just start reading here, and then by the time I get to about here, you're here. And by the time I get down to here, you're asleep. Here's all the bullet points at once. See, remember, that's very important. Bullet points all come up at once, and then that way you can just ignore me and read the bullet points, and you're not paying attention to anything that I'm saying. Again, you guys I can see all the eyes are over here. You noticing this? This guy? All you guys are reading my slides. You're not paying attention to a word that I'm saying. Terrible slide construction, and I see it basically every presentation that I see. This is how people do it. Have them come up one at a time. Short sentences. 1 or 2 words is ideal. You can always tell the amount of time someone has put into a presentation by how many words are on their slide. Okay? Really weak, you haven't practiced at all, there's a ton of words and you read them all. Good slides are like this, Steve Jobs. Considered some of the best public speaking of the modern era, right? Look at his slides. He puts up a couple of words, large font, not even any bullet points, and then just talks about them for a while. That takes a lot of practice to do because, again, the bullet points are kind of a crutch, and if you haven't put your time in and practiced it, it's really difficult to do a spontaneous presentation. You want to give a terrible presentation? Use graphs and charts like this. This is spectacular. Okay? Again, your audience, you can't even read it one, but even if you could read it, again, your audience is going to stare at that and try to read it and ignore everything that you're saying. Even a more reasonable one that's medically oriented like this is still not a good idea. You may recognize this as early goal-directed therapy. So if I put that up there and tried to start talking about early goal-directed therapy, you would ignore me and read this. Most of you are reading it right now, and you're not going to pay attention to a word that I'm going to say. So charts and graphs can be very powerful visual imagery, and they're even better than a bunch of words and bullet points. But if you're going to do it right, okay? So don't put them all up at once. Okay, give it to them in pieces and then talk about each one as you do it. So for example, I'm going to take early goal-directed therapy, simplify it, break it down, and give it to you piecemeal. Okay, so I'm going to put this up here and talk about this for a little while. And then I'm going to move on and say initiate sepsis bundle, add 30 mLs per kg of fluid, broad spectrum antibiotics, aggressive source control. See, Dr. Dellinger, sepsis is pretty easy actually when you break it down like this. Put a CVP monitor in, and then we'll talk about this for a little while, then we move on. And as you go, they can't move ahead of you and start looking at the stuff you haven't talked about yet. They're forced to pay attention to what you're saying, because there's nothing else up there to distract them. So to summarize the kind of first part of my presentation, which is the art of putting together the actual presentation, first, know your audience. Who are you talking to? Know how to speak to them in their language and how to make them care about what you're going to say. It's very different depending on who you're talking to. Remember that a talk is supposed to be persuasion to change behavior. You're not just transmitting information. You want them to leave the room and be so kind of shocked and stunned by what they've heard that they actually change something that they're doing in their professional or personal lives. Own your topic, okay? If it's not something that you hate, either try to get out of doing it or find something about it that's interesting to you. Because if you're bored, your audience will be super bored. Okay? The title is not a super important thing, but if you start off on the wrong foot with a horrifically boring title, you're way behind the 8 ball. Audience is prepared to not be enthralled and not listen to anything that you have to say. And avoid copying, pasting all this kind of useless junk and info about long dead philosophers, elaborate charts and graphs, copying and pasting textbook passages. Terrible PowerPoint presentations. So here's an example of what you might encounter if you ignore everything that I just said.
Let's go to the next bullet point. The Gender 500 offers new and improved and revolutionary technology.
Smile politely, if you're interested. This will be impressed that I can sit through yet another one of these.
Nice. Right now, I'm gonna slit your throat. Sit down and let your blood pool out until we have a nice little pool all over the carpet.
He doesn't even notice me. It's like I'm invisible.
He doesn't even notice me. It's like I'm invisible.
Oh, why even pretend?
The Gender 500 is a winner. And a no-brainer. Great. A portion of our profits
Notice the slide.
also help to fight
Look at all the bullet
stress in the
points.
workplace. Okay, let's try something else.
So for the second part, I'd like to speak to you, and this is quicker, I promise, about the art of the presentation, okay? It's an often neglected piece of a presentation. People have this thought that as long as they have good information, that their talk is going to be good, no matter how they present it. And I would argue that that is incorrect. Think about this for a moment. If you've ever been in this situation, you're at a conference somewhere, and you're in a conference room and someone's giving a talk, and it's kind of terrible, and you hear a door open and close behind you, and you think to yourself, it's probably just someone coming in late for the conference. And yet, for some reason, you have an irresistible urge to turn around and kind of check out what's going on back there. You know it's just someone coming in late, but you turn around and see this guy showing up late, and you're like, oh, he's late. Ooh, is he going to be able to find a chair? I don't know. Not a lot of empty chairs in here. And pretty soon you're sucked into this odyssey of the guy coming in late looking for a chair, and you're not paying attention to the speaker. Okay? Like, oh, I think there's one over there. Oh, he's going for it. He's going, oh no, wait, there's a bag there. There's a bag there. It's reserved. It's reserved. He's not going to be able to sit there. And you're like, what's going to happen? I'm enthralled by what's going to happen when he gets to the chair and finds that there's a bag there. That's what happens when you have a terrible presentation going on. So you, as a speaker, are competing with enthralling doors opening and closing and people coming in late. You're competing with email and games, and your residents are on their laptops, and they're not paying attention to a word that you have to say. So the delivery is really important for that reason, is that you're competing with all these other things for attention. It's been said that the effectiveness of a delivery is really like almost all in the presentation and not at all in the content, which is depressing, but I think that's actually true. Okay, your audience really needs to be entertained and engaged. If you're an effective presenter, even if you have no actual ideas, no facts, no knowledge, nothing to back up what you're saying, people will probably go along with it. If you don't believe me, let me introduce you to a man that 1 out of 5 people in this country sincerely thinks should be the next president of the United States.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I tell you that.
Let's hear it again.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I tell you that.
Notice he didn't really say how he's going to do that, but he sounds really convincing. I'm kind of buying into it myself. If you're a Trump supporter, then I'm sorry. By which I mean I'm sorry for you and our country. So let's start off with the opening pitch, okay? This is really important, okay? So please don't start off with something like, listen, got a long, hard road ahead of us, a lot of slides to get through, it's going to be terrible. Let's just dive in. This is really dry, boring stuff, I know, let's just get through it and move on with our lives. That's a great way to get your audience to turn off right away. The first minute is crucial. You need to grab their attention so that they're convinced that they're going to pay attention to you. It's kind of like how they say, if you would marry someone in the first 2 minutes of meeting them, if you're going to pay attention for the speech in the first 30 seconds to a minute. So make it a good 30 seconds to a minute. So hit them with something profound first, like I tried to do. This is what's called the elevator speech. So the elevator speech is a concept of, let's say you're at a conference and you're going to give a talk, and you get an elevator on the 10th floor, and you're going down the elevator, and someone gets in on the 9th floor. And they say, hey, what are you doing here today? And you're like, I'm going to give a talk. And they say, oh, what's your talk on? And then you have between the 9th floor and the 1st floor to kind of convince this person that what you're going to talk about is important and they should come and listen to you. Okay? It should be like a 30-second encapsulation of why their time would be spent well sitting in your lecture. So for example, if I had to give a lecture on something terrible, like hand washing, okay? That's like the worst thing you could ever imagine doing. My wife's an infectious disease doctor. She may have to do this one day. Pay attention. Okay, I would probably start off by saying something like, in the course of 5 years, everyone in this room is going to kill 3 patients. Why? because you didn't wash your hands. Now let's talk about why it's important to wash your hands. I made that number up. I don't know if that's true or not. It feels true. If you're giving a lecture on EKGs, what Amon Matu does is he'll get up and his elevator speech is, listen to what I have to tell you over the next 60 minutes, and you will save lives. And people in the audience are like, well, that's kind of why I'm a doctor. I want to save lives. So that you got their attention, they'll pay attention. If you're giving a lecture on charting and billing, again, pretty terrible, dry topic, right? Say something like this. If you pay attention to what I'm going to tell you in the next 60 minutes, you will save time documenting, and you'll make more money. Remember how I said before that talking about people's personal safety is one of the things that kind of really grabs their reaction, and grabs their attention? Well, talk about their money and their time, and that's like way more important than like their personal safety, okay? If you can tie what you're having to say into people's money and time, you've got their attention. Tone. So, you want to give a terrible lecture? Just speak in a low, monotonous tone. Don't emphasize anything because really what you're having to say isn't really important. Speak slowly and softly and don't emphasize anything. You don't want to startle anyone in the room. So here's an example of why it's important. Let's say I was giving a presentation on why we're going to initiate a pain protocol for the nurses on long bone fractures. Compare. 35% of patients with long bone fractures receive no analgesic pain medicine within the first 45 minutes of arrival. Compared to 35% of patients receive none pain medicine in the first 45 minutes in the emergency department. Which one do you think is more effective? How about this? You're talking about appendicitis, just a kind of bland, basic appendicitis talk, and you come across this little bullet point, and you say, 30% of patients with appendicitis have a normal white blood cell count, versus 30% of patients with appendicitis have a normal white blood cell count. I mean, it's kind of a stunning fact, but if you just say it in a low, monotonous tone, no one's going to care because you've made them fall asleep. When I was a 14-year-old, I washed dishes at the local country club, and one day a guy came in, I think from Barilla, he was a salesman, and he started talking to the head chef about the pasta. And you have never in your lives seen anyone more excited to talk about pasta. It's al dente every time. Look at the tensile strength. I didn't know pasta had a tensile strength. It has tensile strength. And he's going on and on about the pasta, and he left, and I said to the chef, that guy's a crazy person. Like, who is so crazy and insane about pasta? And he said, we think I'm going to buy pasta from a pasta salesman who's not excited about his pasta? So it's true. Are you going to buy pasta from a presenter who's not excited about his pasta? So you need to show enthusiasm for the topic, especially if it's a mundane, boring topic. You look bored, your audience will be bored, and then you've lost them, and you're done. You need to speak louder than normal conversational tone. Okay, you really need to kind of project your voice. They tried to make me use a microphone, and I said, I think I'll be okay. I talk really loud all the time. Ask my wife. Emphasize and repeat important concepts because at any given time, at any given time, 20 to 40% of your audience is not paying attention to what you're saying. That's about accurate. So body language is also important. It can really help to emphasize what you're saying, or it can make your audience kind of like angry at you. So attend to your body language. For example, this is Donald Trump reaching out to the audience and saying, like, I'm with you, you and me. That's an effective thing to do. This is him looking disgusted at something someone else said. This is him looking mirthful and laughing. I presume he just saw a poor person fall down the stairs. I can only presume. This is hands steepled, looking kind of distinguished, like he knows what we're talking about. Wisdom. It either shows that or it shows that you're wealthy and evil. I'm not sure which one. Maybe both. Both at the same time. Here's what Steve Jobs does, okay? Or did. Hands open, above the waist, like this. Open, like I'm embracing you. Come with me along the journey together. Hands up, moving, like this. What about what should you do with the rest of your body other than your hands? So if you were a fan of West Wing, you might remember the walk and talk. They were constantly walking through the hallways, blathering on about things like HR 132, subsidies for wheat, which is like a horrifically boring topic. Because they're moving, it conveys like action. You can't help but watch them. All right, you're like, that's what they're talking about. It must be interesting. Look how aggressively they're walking down the hallway. So what I would recommend is that you do move across if you can. Now, you shouldn't frantically walk back and forth like this because it'll kind of make your audience nervous, like you're about to pull out a weapon or something. What I would recommend is what Amon Matu says, is he says, I call it the walk and plant. So you kind of walk, Plants, I talk to you for a little while about blah, blah, blah. And then as I'm walking over here, I say some more stuff, some more stuff, some more stuff. I don't run across. I come over here, and now I'm looking at you guys, plants, and I talk for a little bit more. All right? It's effective because human beings are entrained to detect motion, okay? We're predators. Our eyes are in front of our head. All right? They see motion, and you're drawn to motion. You can't help but look and see what's going on. All right? Your audience is basically like this.
Squirrel. Squirrel.
You see motion, and you can't help but look. Because, I don't know, maybe it's something you might want to kill and eat.
Squirrel.
Hand motions can be an effective way to emphasize your points. Bill Clinton was famous for the kind of like thumb on top of the hand going like this, like he's spoon feeding you something or giving you something. This is Al Gore doing the karate chop, a little more aggressive. Global warming is bad, karate chop. Here's another famous and effective public speaker. It's Mussolini. He's saying, you know, you and me. That's what he's saying. We're in this together. And then, of course, we got Donald Trump finger pointing towards the heavens as if to say, me and God, pretty much on the same page about this whole wall thing. So, you want to give a terrible presentation? Don't connect with your audience, okay? Don't look at them. I mean, really, you're the important one. They should be looking at you, right? So, like, try to look at the clock on the wall, look at your feet, do anything you can to avoid engaging your audience, making eye contact. Maintain an aloof stance to really emphasize how much better you are than them, and that will really help you connect to your audience. Okay, that's a terrible idea, obviously. If you may not realize, I've been walking around making eye contact with tons of people in the room, okay? And that at some points, it may even be appropriate to approach them with your hands open, kind of like this. As I approach you talking, you can't help but look at me and pay attention to what I'm saying, and you'll probably remember this for a long time to come. Find friendly faces, someone that's gonna, if you get nervous or you're not sure what's going, you lose your spot, find someone in the audience you can look at who will kind of look at you and smile and nod encouragingly, and then you'll kind of get back on track. I do this all the time when my boss talks to me. He'll come in my office and sit down and go on about something or other, and I look at him and smile and, yeah, I make noises like that, What you're saying is very important and interesting to me. You know, I want him to think that I'm a friendly face he can come to. Here are ways you should end your presentations. Say something like, that's it. That's all I have. This is my personal favorite. I guess I'm done. You guess you're done? You're not sure? Maybe there's another slide after this one, but you can't remember because you're such a terrible speaker. I guess I'm done. Any questions is a popular one. However, I would point out that it becomes very awkward right at the end there, because usually people think they want to applaud for you and stuff, and they're not sure when they should do that. So if you end your presentation and say any questions, people are like, now? Do you applaud now or after? I'm not sure. So what I would suggest instead is to do something like repeat your major themes, give your elevator speech again, pause, and then say, thank you for your time. That is a cue that everyone recognizes. Now it's time to applaud. Now I applaud. And then after they're done applauding, then you can move on and say, does anyone have any questions? It just kind of avoids that awkward end of your speech. So to summarize, how to give an effective delivery of your speech, remember your opening pitch. Your elevator speech should be 30 seconds and should encapsulate everything you're trying to get out of your talk. Your tone is important, okay? Go up and down with it. Emphasize important concepts with your speech. Your body language, try to get your hands up. I do a lot of this. Try to get your hands up above the waist. Gesturing. Again, it's motion. People are drawn to motion. They'll pay more attention to you. End strong. Don't end weak. I guess that's all I have. Repeat your elevator speech, and then end with some kind of profound statement. We'll see if I land that. So remember, when you go to present to an audience, that speeches are an oral presentation that's an argument to change behavior. You want your audience to leave here and do something different than they did before. Put in your time. If you don't have the time to dedicate to something like this, don't do it. If someone comes up to you and says, hey, I need you to give an hour lecture in 2 days, I would tell them, no way. There's no way I can put together an effective lecture in 2 days and not waste everyone's time. So if you're going to go out and give a speech, especially in front of a bunch of important people like today, make sure you have the time to dedicate to researching it, crafting it, editing it, practicing it until it's honed. Remember to address your audience's needs, fears, and wants. If you can tap into those things, if you can make the audience afraid that if they don't pay attention to you, bad things are going to happen. If you know what they want to hear, if you know what they need to hear, you can capture their attention and they will pay attention to you. Don't kill your audience with PowerPoint. All right? If anyone leaves this room today and goes out and has 18 bullet points with dense, small font, I'm going to be very upset. I gave this talk to a bunch of residents a couple years ago, and then for the next 3 years, every time someone came up to do a presentation, they said, well, I knew I couldn't put a bunch of bullet points full of text up there because of Dr. Byrne, like I ruined it for everyone. And remember to attend to your tone, your body language. My challenge to you is to think right now about the last time you gave a presentation to a group. And try to pull one or two concepts from what I've talked to you about today to go back and make that talk better. Anything. It could be in the construction. It could be your slide presentation. It could be your body language, walking across back and forth, not using elaborate charts and graphs. One or two things to improve your presentations. Because after all, if you can give an effective presentation and your audience leaves and does something different than they did before, then you have, in a small but very real way, changed the world. Thank you very much for your time. Well, Dr. Coker sets up his talk. I thought we could, if anyone has any comments or questions about all the stuff that I just said, I'm happy to answer them now. Yeah?
Great talk, thanks.
Thanks.
Question. How do you think a talk that you say this one, or maybe not this one, a real talk, would be impacted if your audience had your slide set in advance?
Yeah, I have to say, I think that might detract from it a little bit. Again, that's kind of like they could just read it then. Why are they paying attention to you? Honestly, if I gave you my slide set, you wouldn't get this presentation at all. So again, that's kind of going back to the concept of if they can read it, why are they listening to you? And so I think the oral presentation, the practiced, polished delivery of it is probably the most effective tool for changing behavior. And if they could just read your PowerPoint, why do they have to listen to you? That's kind of how I think about it.
Right. Follow-up question.
Yeah.
Maybe my second question. If you wanted your audience to, learn something from the talk, and maybe they had to go back and study what you presented, would you make the slides any differently than the way you just sort of suggested that you make our slides?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to remember is that if you want them to learn something, remember that they're only going to learn maybe 3 or 4 things from your talk. So you try to teach them everything there is to know about pulmonary embolism. I mean, it's a fool's errand. They're not going to remember anything. So if you want them to learn it, I would emphasize it over and over again. And then the fact that you've made it seem so important because you tapped into their fears and what they need to know is that they're going to leave thinking, man, I really got to read up on this topic. So that's kind of how I look at the oral presentation, is it makes them want to know it. And then you, by emphasizing it and going over it over and over again, only focusing on 3 or 4 things is probably the best way to make something stick. Because again, 90% of what you tell them is gone in a week. Anyone else? Yeah.
The idea of pre-test, post-test, that distracting, or depends on what you're like?
No, Dr. Koch can probably speak to that more because I typically don't do that. Now, I think it might be an effective way, especially if you're giving a speech on a talk that is something really important to patient safety, for example, to kind of expose their ignorance. Is that what you're trying to say? So that they take the pre-test, they're awful, and they think, man, I really should learn about this. I think it's effective as long as you convince them during your actual talk that what you have to say is worthwhile, they should know it.
I guess it goes back to what you want to persuade them to change
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else? All right, thank you.